So now we are moving on to the next speaker, and Harles will do the intro. Over to you.
Thank you, Kaspar. The first question is that, Jan, are you online?
Yes.
Nice to meet you. How is the weather in Stockholm?
The weather in Stockholm is excellent. It's sunny and warm and really, really nice.
It's good to hear, because this is the true weather of Nordic testing days. So
Yes.
actually, there are not so many people who proudly say that they test in production. How did you came to this solution that some things must be tested in production and not before going into production?
Well, basically, this is a talk trying to sort out the misconception about what testing in production is. And I've been doing different things, and I found a book that kind of summarized everything by Katrina Clokey, Testing in DevOps, I think it's called, that gave names to things that we already did. And I based my presentation on that one.
Okay, but in that case, floor is yours. Please enlighten us what the testing in production is, how does it look like, and to everybody who is listening, please submit the questions, and we will ask after your presentation all those questions.
Excellent, thank you. So, testing in production is the topic, and we'll sort some things out. Just to start with, there are quite a few slides, but you will get them afterwards, so you can walk through it again. Without further ado, I'll click here, and I hope that we have the new slide. Yes. This is normally the reaction when you say testing in production, something you would not do. But there are two sides of this coin, of course, so you could test before production and what we call testing in production, use that moving forward. So what is the reason for doing this? Well, everything is moving a lot faster today. So with the introduction of everything continuous, the continuous integration, where the code is actually added to a main branch, and the main branch is actually possible to deliver at any time, and it could actually be accessed by the customer at very, very short notice. We have turnaround times of hours or even minutes. This gives a very small window of opportunity for anyone testing the code to actually do that. And also, if you look at the classical DevOps forever loop, so to say, there's a tiny, tiny bit that's called testing, which is the classical part that usually is in testing between coding, building, and actually releasing. As we all know, we should actually test early, and we should test different things, which means that we have different options. And the things that are kind of included in the pre-production is pretty straightforward, and most testers know this. But then we have the things that comes afterwards, what happens when we release and after we release. That is usually something that's not very known and not very well used. So we're going to talk about a bit about this during this presentation. But first of all, what is testing in production, just to clear out the misconceptions that we have? Mainly, it's about releasing smarter. It's about active use of feedback, and also specific but very few testing technologies, basically. So it's more about how you make the code accessible for the customer. And going into that, we go into the releasing part, where Canarying or Canary deploy is one way of doing it. Here I usually ask the audience if they heard about it, and usually I get like 10-15% who actually heard about Canarying, but it's spreading. So Canarying is releasing, deploying, and verifying on a small instance of your infrastructure at the time, which means you give the opportunity to test this on a limited audience. So you release, run your tests if you have them, and monitor closely. And then you move on, which is really nice. And coupled to everything that we do in the release process, it should be easy to do rollbacks. You should have all the rollback technology there. If you have feature toggles or roll forward technology, it doesn't really matter. So a tip from my side is always start with the cheapest instance that you have, or the one that has the least impact moving forward. So an example of this, I will give example for all this different technology. I used to work for a gaming company that had one platform serving 26 different sites, actually several millions users, which meant that if we in the platform team deployed anything that broke the system, that would be disaster if that hit all the users. So we split the system up in 6 instances, making it possible to actually deploy to one instance, verify by testing we had, and monitor. And when that was green and everyone was happy, we moved forward. So we did the next instance, did the same thing there, tested, and moved forward. This meant that if we found anything, we found it early, and that was really nice. But then we rolled out the software, and it was hopefully working all over. Also meaning that if we roll out the first instance, the cheapest one, as I said, and we found some defect, some bug, something that didn't really work, we had a rollback function there. So we could roll back the code to the latest working, and we had a working code again. And a minimum amount of users were actually affected. Then there's a cousin or a very close relation to the Canary stage. It's the same technology, but you base it on user group and demographics. This could, however, be a challenge for many because you don't have your system built for selecting different user groups or build it on demographics. But if you can, it's a really nifty thing to do. In Sweden, we have a quite large company that handles streaming of music, and they have the ability to do this, which means that they could select a user group in a selected geographic location, like some audience in Germany. They get a new code, it's verified, it's working, everyone happy. They move to the next tier, which could be in that case in Budapest, and they do the same thing, they test it, they verify, and everyone's happy. Rolling out, we get to France, and we test it, and all of a sudden something breaks. And again, they have all these rollback processes very tightly aligned to the release, which means that they can roll back to the last working code and everything's working again. So when you have certain apps, you get all of a sudden new functionality, and for whatever reason, you miss that functionality or get reverted, and this is usually what happens. So then we have something called a dark launch. A dark launch is really having your system in a parallel system to the production system, which means that you release the software. This is mainly used for backend software, and it's hidden in a hidden mode. Then it's executed alongside the live code, which means that everything the user does goes to the production system, but the same action actually goes to your test system as well. This pushes some of the traditional testing into the production environment. You can actually use this. And also, it's often released then later on in a stage rollout or a Canarying release. So this is very nice to have. We did this in a client-server solution. We had the server, the clients, and when we wanted to release, that was usually a very time-consuming thing, and we had to shut down the system or do it on the night, which was not really nice. So we set up a shadowing system that had the same interaction from the clients, but never sending the response back. Then we had logging and monitoring in place that kind of compared the different activities and saw that the result was the same, the numbers came out correctly. And when everyone was happy and we said that this is actually working, we switched to the new code on the new server, which was a really easy task to do. So instead of deploying everything on the actual server, we just switched the server, which took about 5 minutes. This is really nice. And this is also included in many of the cloud system. AWS call it the green and blue systems. You deploy on one, run it on the other, and then switch back and forth. Dogfooding is a popular thing as well when we talk about the different ways of releasing things, and that is basically using your own software. The term comes from the marketing industry, where it says that if you market dog food, you should also try the dog food and eat it. I wouldn't recommend it, but still. The new software is basically used by internal users, and it's a really good thing because the users is close. You can talk to them. It's easy to access them. One other thing to think about, though, is that the users that you are using might not be representative for the intended users, and the internal users can also be biased, either positively or negatively. It could be both, actually. So, as an example, I did a thing on a consulting firm that has financial consultants, and they had built a portal that gave access to their customers to all these nice financial systems. But since they also had consultants, they used the same portal, which meant that we did upgrades to the portal that we had. And when we did that, the consultants, i.e., the company's own staff, used the new version and tried it out. That gave us the opportunity to see that everything was working correctly before we let the other users online. So this was really a golden scenario for us in dogfooding terms, but it was really nice to have. So moving on to the feedback session. User feedback is something that is usually overlooked. You normally have a support organization, you have customers calling in, and very seldom the developers or the tech department have any good contact with this department of support. So it's a good thing to have contact with them. But think about that user feedback. I mean, when do a customer call? They call when something is not working. They can be biased or based on emotions. So it could be kind of hard to get to the core of what's going on. But it's a good source of information. So an example we used. In Sweden, we have something called a bank ID. The bank ID is built by the banks. And most people in Sweden is using this for identifying themselves to different services. So they went to our site, they started their bank ID, and we let them into our system. And it usually works very, very well. But we had one customer saying that he could not log in. He could at some times, but he couldn't at other times. And it was really confusing for us. So finally, we actually let the developers talk to this customer directly, which is not super usual. And we realized that he couldn't log in when he was at work. So looking further, we realized that it was a couple of ports that we used that his company had blocked. So that meant that he couldn't get through the system. And finding this also meant that we could open up other ports or use other ports that was normally open to people. So this gave us some real good insight. And just because we had developers talking to the actual customer who had an issue. So that was really working nicely. One of the classical feedback is, of course, logging. Logging, being the cousin to monitoring, is really, really good thing to use. Normally, you use this for helping out with root cause analysis, seeing what went on, what didn't really work, and when after the fact, so to say. But you can also use logs as a proactive tool, looking for patterns that deviate from the expected. So it's a versatile tool that is often overlooked. One small example, once again, our client server solution. Sometimes one of the clients crashed. We didn't really know why, but we could just restart the client and everything was okay. But at other occasions, when one of the clients crashed, it actually crashed the server as well, and all the clients went down. So this was really annoying, and we could not really find the root cause of this. We couldn't replicate it. We had monitoring on the clients, but we couldn't find the reason. So what the developers did was to build a small microservice, in this case a YCF service or VCF service, that logged the actions on the actual server. Very limited, very small service. And then we actually found the issue, which meant that we did not prevent the clients from crashing, but we did actually prevent the server from crashing as the clients did. And this was really, really nifty. And connected to this is, of course, analytics. So on logging comes analytics for obvious reasons. You collect data for user activities. You often used it with different kind of testing, like A/B testing, beta testing, and so on. And this is really usable. When we had the issue with the bank ID, we realized that we wanted to have more information and we could analyze the system because we found strange things. So what we did, we set up some logging and analytics on this. We used Elasticsearch and Kibana. We want to keep track of different states and also analyze round trip latency and, of course, analyze discrepancies in this system. We made it really easy. We made a checkpoint for how many logins were started, how many bank ID was started, how many successful logins we had, how many active users, and how many logged out. We then found that we have an anomaly in number of started bank IDs and successful logins. Of course, you can actually stop logging in once you start your bank ID, but that is not super common. But we realized that one version of iOS did not support the bank ID jump that we needed. And we realized that it wasn't really on our end. It was a thing between the bank ID and Apple, which meant that the bank ID had to rewrite their system. But we also had an issue between how many logins we had, active users, and logouts. And this was an insurance company, so we actually need to log out people so their sessions and everything wasn't open or their information was not open. And then analyzing this really tightly with log files, we realized that if they abandoned their session in a specific state, it actually killed the session, but they were not logged out, meaning that people could access their information but not do any activities. But that was bad enough. So we kind of put a plug in that hole just based on logging and analytics. Really useful. So the big thing, monitoring. I would preach that monitoring is a thing that you should try to have everywhere where it's possible. And we're not talking about the build monitoring. This is like the system monitoring, how your system is doing, how many logins you have, anomalies, whatever. And it's a really good thing. You can use monitoring to see when something happens, and you can also use it to confirm that you fixed something. If you run the same thing with the same monitoring, you see if it is working or not, the fix that you did. In continuous and DevOps, you need fast feedback in production, and logging and monitoring is really what you should have in place for this. So there's two different loggings: active monitoring, which monitoring, of course, keeping an eye what's going on. You have usually a big monitor in your development department or something on your screen that kind of gives you the attention. But you could also have alerting monitoring, which means that you get an SMS, you get a text message in your phone, you get something similar that kind of alerts you that something is not working. And this is really good. You can also use monitoring in preventive fashion by running, of course, non-breaking tests in production. And this can trigger events that then can be monitored, specifically if you're looking for something, but also just to do a health check of your system for every new release that you do. So back again to our client crash. We fixed the issue with the actual server not working really properly. But then we had the issue with the client crashing, and we could not really find the reason for that, which meant that we put in monitoring for the clients. So together with Kibana and Elasticsearch, we had kept track of the number of crashes that we have for individual clients. So for each release that we did, we tried to find the root cause. We kind of logged and monitored the number of crashes, and we could see if it went up or if it went down, and if we were actually finding something. This way, we went down from, we had like 50 users in the system, and we had initially some 10 to 15 client crashes per day. But using this technology by monitoring every new release, we went down to 1 or 2 per day, which was okay for the users apparently. And we also could see that anything that we introduced, any new functionality, did not increase the number of crashes or make it bad again. So then, of course, you should get the question, if monitoring is so good and if monitoring is so important, could we replace testing with monitoring? You should, of course, have monitoring in production. You should have it in the pre-production system. But it means that in the pre-production system, you need to have the activities that trigger the monitoring. And if you don't have that, you will actually move the defects into production before it's found by your monitoring. And also you need to do a very thorough gap analysis between what's tested and not, and what is covered by the monitoring. But still, it would work to have monitoring instead of some of the testing, but it actually requires that you do some of these different technologies to release in a very smart way. It also means that you have to have a plan to roll back quickly, and you have to have the organization in place to do these rollbacks if needed. And most of all, you have to have extremely loyal customers. If you are in a competitive market where you have others delivering the same service, I would not recommend doing this, because if your system crashes and you fix it quickly, it doesn't really help because you already lost your customer there. So moving on to what's actually a bit of testing. The classical testing is, of course, A/B testing, which means that the user get one of several versions of the software to try out, and you kind of divide that in different ways, and then you track and see which one works the best, which gets the best move forward in the system, the most bang for the buck. And this is not functional testing. This is basically to see which different design that works really well compared to another. What is the best conversion rate for the different versions? And it's also a tip here. A/B testing can become too important when deciding on the design. It's easy to focus on what worked really well in different A/B activities, but it might not be the thing for your market. And one example is what I understand Google actually tried 50 different shades of blue in an A/B test just to find the correct one, and that might be overdoing it. Also, one of the testing activities in production is, of course, beta testing. Beta testing is giving access to the new version of your system to a selected group of customers or users. And it is a good practice, I would say, if it's possible. And the main purpose here is actually to verify the product and the functionality of the product that is still working as expected. And the beta testers might not always provide feedback, which means they are using the system. If it crashes, they know, okay, this is a beta version, so it might crash. They might not report it. And also, the beta testers might not be the ones that try very quirky or strange things. They use the system in the way they are used to, and you might need to complement with negative testing performed by the development team. And one way of putting this up is, of course, a similar thing that we did with the portal that we had. But in case of using the internal staff, you have selected customers using the new system, and you verify that it's working or not. But since the reporting is not very good, I would suggest again to add logging and monitoring on top of this to see what has been covered, what has not been covered, did it break or not, and in what case did it actually break. So that would be a really good thing to top on that. So going back to what it is and what it is not when we talk about testing in production. Testing in production is not about deploying untested code straight into the production system, leaving any issues for the customers to find. There are jokes within the testing community saying that we don't need any tester within an organization. We have millions of them out there in the wild. But with that, you will soon end up in this situation where everything is burning down and you cannot really save it. So it's not about that. It is about releasability, the way you release things, and work out the way that works well for you, that you can use in your organization. But also very, very important, you need to have the ability to roll back once you have released something that you find didn't really work. It could be a rollback, a roll forward, feature toggles. There are different technologies to do this. And most important, I would say, is have logging and monitoring. If you have that, you will find things early, and you can be proactive instead of actually having people calling in saying that things doesn't work. And the different technologies, it's like everything that we use within testing. This is your toolbox. Use it as a toolbox. If you need a hammer, you use a hammer. If you need pliers, you need pliers. Don't use every tool that you have in your toolbox. Use it in the way you need to when it's working for you. And that's the way to move forward, I would say. So this is just some new input for you to use or try out within your normal working day. So that was testing in production. So I'm ready for a Q&A if you have any questions. And as I said, there is a reference list behind this slide. So if you want to go back and check references, you can do that, which could be good if you want to dig deeper into this topic. Okay. Oh no, I ended early.
Thank you very much, Jan.
Thank you.
Was a really interesting topic because, testing and in production are not usually the words you want to see in one sentence. So, have you been a guinea pig yourself ever?
Yes, I have. I drive a motorcycle, and we have a app in Sweden called Detect, which is really good. That really detects if you crash and will send a message to the emergency system, and it keep track of your routes and things. And I'm a beta tester for that as well. That is the most recent things, but I've done it for other systems as well. Since I'm a tester, I kind of like to sign up on things like this. But as a Spotify user, I see new functionality coming in and moving out, and the same thing with Teams in the latest week, basically. So we are all guinea pigs out there.
Well, at least you are doing it knowingly. But how is the crashing the motorcycle going? I don't see that
I
being
haven't
very helpful.
had. No, I haven't actually had the use of the crash detecting thing, but it has a lot of other nice things. You can share your routes with friends and family, and this also will send a text message to any relatives if something happens. So it's a combined GPS, social media, and detection system built into one app. So that's working really well.
This got my fantasy really rolling. I mean, social media integration. It seems that you have crashed your motorcycle. Would you like to share that on Facebook?
Yes.
I'm sure that Harles has a few other questions as well on top of mine.
Yes, there are lots of them actually, and I think we can use the time. So the first is that it seems that to have the ability to test on production, the way you mentioned, is very expensive as one needs multiple tools, users and other stuff to test. How this compares to having a pre-production environment to test on prior releasing in terms of costs?
One really important thing is to say that we do not omit the testing in pre-production. That is really important to remember. It's not that we replace the pre-production testing with testing production. And the testing of production is, as I said, mainly focused on how you release, using feedback, and also a minimal amount of actual testing. So we haven't used any specific tools for this, besides the different ways of releasing. But the nice thing is that we get this, I wouldn't say for free, but deploying in a hidden environment like Canarying or something like that actually give us the extra possibility to see that it's working in a small amount of the market or a small part of the market. Also deploying on a hidden system that gets all the information free, so to say, from the users that's out there, give us the possibility to find things that we missed in the pre-production testing, since the window of opportunity for pre-production testing is growing smaller all the time. So that's really the reason why we try to do this. I haven't looked at cost, quite honestly, but I couldn't stress this enough. It doesn't replace the testing that we do before. This is kind of an extra safety net for us moving faster into production and moving in a controlled way into production.
Okay, thank you. Does it also mean that testers have new role being in charge of something what is executed in production? Usually testers are the people who can't access production and can't make any decisions what is going on in production.
Yeah, it's twofold, basically. For many of the organizations I worked for where we have tried to implement this, we basically have very few or even no testers. This is one of the reasons why we're doing this, since we have a limited amount of people doing actual proper traditional testing. There's a lot of automation, of course, going on, unit testing, integration testing, regression testing, that's automated in pre-production system. But then we have very few testers available. But also testing in production gives you the opportunity to work on what needs to be monitored, what needs to be logged, how do we analyze the things that we see, and also comparing the pre-production system with the production system when it comes to the data that we gather. So from a tester point of view, I would say it's more getting more skilled into monitoring. I recently learned, for the sake of this, learned the Kibana tool together with Elasticsearch and also other types of monitoring. So that's basically it.
Thank you. You described some successful tests in production. Can you give us an overview of your biggest failure in production?
I mean, of course, we have failure in production, but I try to connect it somehow to the things that we've done. And I would say that the thing that we did incorrectly to start with was that when we tried to slice and dice the different systems for like Canary deploys, we didn't really look at the impact or the size of the market we looked at. We looked at the technical limitations, so to say, oh, this is a small market as far as you see it from a technical point of view, and didn't really check with the business or the marketing department if this was really, okay, this was just one country, but it showed that this one country actually provided us with 25% of our revenue. So it was a super bad environment to start with. So I think one of the things that you do is check with the rest of the organization to kind of make a good foundation for the decisions you make moving forward. So on top of my head, that is basically the biggest mistake that we did. We aimed what we thought was a small market, which proved to be a really huge market for the company.
Okay, thank you. Then the next question. Do you also somehow migrate user sessions when switching production servers?
Not sessions per se. The only thing that we did was to synchronize all the data that we had in the databases. And since we also had a system that was parallel, everything that was added after we actually added a new version was then to the so-called, or what you would like to call the test database as well. So the databases were synchronized with, first of all, the old data, and the new data came in as a delta, but not sessions. We actually turned down the system in between there, and the other systems are not depending on sessions like that, because when someone ends a session and start a new one, they will get into the new version.
Okay, thank you. Then next one. Have you also tried some application log mappers that search for trends and adjust monitoring based on the trends? Somehow, like the number of requests grow as a number of customers increase, and any unexpected peaks or something similar?
Yes, we have, but I have been fortunate to have an ops organization supporting us there, which meant that we have put forward requests where we want to see if people stop in a certain place, specifically when we come to e-commerce, that people fill their shopping basket with something, they go to the checkout page and don't complete the buy for some reason. Where do they stop? And then we can analyze why they stopped, or if it's a very strange UI or a very strange UX experience, or if it's even something in our code in the back end or front end that prevents them from actually doing the activities. But we have used things that is built into AWS Cloud. I don't have any names for it because we kind of handed that over to our AWS people. So we have used it in that way, yes. But I have not any personal experience with any specific tool in that area.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. If you have a very large system and there are many logs and monitoring, how do you get visibility about what is relevant and what is not? how do you manage monitoring alarming hell?
Yes, that is a classical question, especially when it comes to logging, because it's possible to log huge amount of information. Logging we have used in many different ways, but the main purpose has been trying to find something specific, which meant that we have built specific microservices just logging very specific things, meaning that we can follow that log. If we don't really know what we're looking for, we try to log a lot of things and also try to see that if something happens when we see on the monitoring that something kind of shifts from the normal, we go back to the logs at the same time and analyze those. In the larger organizations been in, we had a BI service that not only handled business data, but also, of course, the data lake and all the transactions that were used for the system, which helped us out a lot. But looking for errors, looking for differences, looking for same things, we had kind of started wide and then narrowed it down as we found things. That's kind of the way we had to work forward. But it's easy to log too much and to monitor too much. So it's always good to start small and then kind of ramp it up as you go.
Clear. Now we are waiting new questions from audience. Kaspar, do you have any questions to ask?
Yeah, there's a question I have. So first of all, why do you even call it a testing in production? Because actually it's the users that are supplying the input, and essentially it's collecting fast and limited feedback. So can we really call it testing?
Yes and no. That's why I'm trying to sort out the misconception about the word using the naming testing production. But for some reason, the term testing in production is kind of emphasizing all these different things. It has become the standard terminology for the different activities. And no, it's not testing per se. You have users providing you with data, with input, with activities, and then it's totally up to you to analyze the things that comes in. So they are not testers per se, but they are drivers or robots, if you want to call them like that, that provide the information to you. And in the testing society, it has become, for some reason, the standard terminology to say that this is testing in production and this is emphasizes these different areas.
How about system access? So just to give you an example, I work in the financial sector, and obviously getting access to live environments is supposed to be hard, limited, and restricted. And for testers to gain access to live monitoring, live logs, not to even mention databases, it's difficult to say the least. So how do you go about that?
Yes, I worked for a financial company. That the company that had this portal that was a financial company, and I would say that we did get access to the system. We did get access to the databases to some extent in the production system as well. Our main hurdle or the main thing that was really hard to work around somehow, that we need to use different ways and actually using the activity actually created real data, is that most financial system logs everything you do. You get some kind of ID number for every activity you do, for every transaction you do. Everything you do in the system ramps up the log and ID numbers. That was the biggest challenge, basically. So we made a really thorough analysis of what we had to do in the testing system, where we could actually reset and work a lot with the different data, and what we were looking for in the live system. So the access was not really the hard part. The hard part was actually sorting out what to do not to have a negative impact on the system, because we didn't want the invoice numbers to get kind of ramped up as we did testing. So we actually had to analyze real activities in the system. That was the kind of workaround for this.
Thanks a lot. That was very useful. Carlos, do you have any more questions?
I have one. This is related with management. Have you had cases when you should explain to companies' managers, no, CXOs, why you need to test in production?
Yes, but as I came back to earlier, it's mainly about different ways of releasing given access to the code, and also they a decision usually, and also, as I said, mainly depending on the lack of testers in the organization. So this is a way to put the code out in the wild without actually affecting the users in a great extent. So mainly they have been positive. We have to explain what the impact could be and etc. But also if it's a corporate decision not to have the possibility to test extensively in pre-production, we need to find another way forward. And this has been kind of a middle route to do it. But as I said, it's not that much testing or doing strange activities in production. It's more about how you release it, how you give access to the code, and actually ramp it up moving forward. And also actively using what happens in the system by logging and monitoring and learning from that experience. So it's been a mix, but I so far had positive reactions from anyone who has kind of sitting on either the budget or the decision.
Okay, you mentioned that you learned Kibana, you learned monitoring, logging. Is there anything else a tester must know or have experience with to be able to test in production and get results?
Not any specific things. The need that you need to know is what could be breaking changes and what could have a disastrous impact while done in production as a testing effort. And that is from system to system. So you need to know what happens in the system. If you actually do a transaction in the system, where does it end up? What dependencies to other systems you have? In our case, with the insurance company, we had contact with the DMV, the vehicle authority in Sweden. We had contact with the tax authority, etc. So you need to know your system on a traffic level, so to say. Where does your information end up, and what dependencies do you have? But not any specific tools or technology per se. You kind of learn that on the way. So it's more system knowledge of the system under test.
Thank you. And Kaspar, what do you think? Can we finish this session?
Yeah, I'm getting more hopeful. I mean, specifically, I'm thinking about my own work and how our customers would feel about testing in production, specifically when their money is involved. So this really gave food for thought, I have to say that. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.